folks, and welcome to the Snowy's Camping Show. You are here with Ben and Lauren as usual, and today we've got some pretty awesome guests with us all the way from Queensland. But before we get into that conversation, don't forget to subscribe wherever you're listening to your podcast. Also hit that subscribe button if you're here watching us on YouTube, and jump on to Facebook and join our Snowy's Camping Show group there, where we have loads of discussion around the episodes, get feedback about what you guys want to hear, and try to give advice where applicable.
As best we can.
Yeah. So we have got Zac and Sam from Hard Korr with us today. How are you guys?
Hey, guys.
Very well. How you doing?
Yeah, pretty good. So we get lots and lots of inquiries around 12-volt power, battery chemistries, portable power packs, auxiliary battery setup, solar, all of that sort of stuff. So today we're going to pick your brains on some of that. Are you ready?
As ready as we'll ever be.
It's a debated topic. Whenever you talk battery chemistries, we were just talking before, you talk battery chemistry, solar, then everyone's got their own sort of version of events. So we'll try and clear it up for those who are new to it and not make it so scary, I suppose, to set up your four-wheel drive or your caravan.
Well, it can be quite overwhelming. I mean, I know for me personally, as I was just mentioning before, and you guys out there would already know, my partner's electrician, does 12-volt solar installations, things like that. And the amount of times we talk about this stuff and it doesn't stick for me. It doesn't matter how many times we go over it, how many notes I make. I'm like, I'm pretty sure this is right. And he's like, yeah, that's right. You doubt yourself. So even if you sort of do know or have someone around you that knows, it can still be pretty overwhelming, can't it?
You're always calling him saying, I've got this question. What does this mean? Can you clarify?
Help me. Yeah, totally. So I guess ultimately we'll kick this one off by getting an overview of batteries themselves, sort of exactly how they work, what sort of chemistries are out there and things like that.
Without getting too scientific.
Without getting too scientific, right, guys? Then.
So,
I guess the most common battery that people would be familiar with is the one in their car, which is lead acid battery. Yeah.
So batteries are made up of cells, and the amount of cells changes the voltage or the ampere of a battery. But can you give a basic outline of kind of how a battery is constructed, and are they all similar when you talk about the different chemistries in terms of just how many cells are in there, and that then sort of results in the amount of the voltage of the battery or the total amount of amps?
There's quite a few batteries on the market where you've got the flooded lead acid, you've got AGM, you've got wet calcium, you've got gel, lithium as well too. Again, the cells vary in all of them. I guess the most popular for camping would be the AGM battery, which is absorbed glass matte.
Yeah, quite right. It's probably beyond the scope of this podcast to go too much into to exactly how does a battery charge, how does a battery discharge? But very basically, there's plates in a battery that are they're generally absorbed into some sort of a liquid. In the case of flooded cell, gel obviously is similar, but it's a jelly-like substance. You've got your AGM, which where the electrolytes are absorbed into porous fiberglass mats, and then obviously now we have lithium, which is a whole different subject altogether. But just touching on something that you mentioned before, most people are familiar with the batteries that they're inside their vehicle, generally known as a crank battery or a start battery, and they are very different in their makeup to the type of batteries that you would use for camping or forward driving, which are called deep cycle batteries. Your start batteries or your crank batteries they're designed to provide short, sharp bursts of high current, particularly to start the engine. Generally, they won't be required to deeply discharge because the alternator tops up the battery once the engine's started, as opposed to deep cycle batteries used for camping and forward driving, which are designed to be charged periodically, not continuously, and they're designed so that you can discharge a lot more of the battery's total capacity before recharging it without without it damaging the battery cells. And so what you'll find in a crank battery or a start battery is that the plates are generally thinner and the active material less dense in order to provide more surface area for the chemical reactions to occur, which is why they can provide a higher current, whereas the deep cycle batteries are designed for prolonged use, longer service life with that prolonged use, or the deeper discharge, I should say. So the plates are generally thicker. That's the main physical difference. So they generally don't deliver the short, sharp bursts, but can deliver continuous power at a lower current draw for longer periods of time.
I think that was a pretty
And
good
your question? That's why we brought Sam.
No, I think that
just a bloke that knows a lot of useless facts.
Yeah. It does get pretty complex, but I think that probably outlines it pretty well. With, like you say, it goes beyond the scope of this podcast. But maybe I think to summarize that, yeah, when you talk about that deep cycle battery, that's your auxiliary battery. When we talk to people about putting an auxiliary battery or a secondary battery in your vehicle or your caravan to power your fridge or your lights or your fan, that's the deep cycle or auxiliary battery. And your starter battery is not designed so much to run those devices. You can while the car's running because the car's charging the battery, so you're running it off the car essentially. But that's there just to start the car, drops a massive amount of charge really quickly to get the car going, and then it charges up again. That's pretty much all it's there for.
I have a question.
The two should not be. Sorry, I was going to say the two should not be mixed. So you shouldn't use a crank battery as a deep cycle battery. A lot of people think that you can. The simple fact is you cannot. It will significantly decrease the service life of your crank battery if you try and use it as a deep cycle battery.
Okay.
I just had a question that came up, and I'm not really sure if it's relevant to the flow of where we are in the podcast, but I'm going to answer it anyway.
Fair enough.
If you're having a secondary battery put in your car, do you need to have that secondary battery being the same chemistry as your crank battery or your starter battery?
No, you don't. And in almost all cases, or in all cases, it won't be the same chemistry.
Okay. Awesome.
I think we've got an issue. We're just going to joke about it. You guys have got a really technical setup there with a shade to stop those lines from appearing across your faces, and
piece of paper there.
Things are falling apart. So that's what we're mucking around.
We're experienced podcast.
Very
much.
Yeah, no, we're only slightly bit more experienced here. But so just if you don't touch anything or move for the next half an hour, we should be right.
Touch the
hands
table.
up. Yeah, hands up. That's it.
Hands are off the table. Hands are off the table.
What was your last question? On mixing the chemistries of the battery. Yeah. But they have different charge cycles, right? So I was actually distracted by the light filter there and didn't actually listen to your answer then, Sam. But
no, it's only because, my partner actually builds batteries, and I know that from that perspective, if he wants to increase the capacity of a battery, he's got to have exactly the same sort of cells in the ways that he adds them together in the same chemistries or whatever. And I was just wondering if you have your starter battery or crank battery, if that's, say, obviously an AGM style battery, can you then have your secondary battery as a lithium, or is there any considerations with that?
Okay, so there's two situations which are kind of related that we're probably talking about here. Okay. As I said before, the crank battery and your auxiliary battery will almost invariably be of different chemistry and probably different size.
Okay.
But if you have an auxiliary battery setup where you've got more than one battery, say you've got two batteries connected in parallel, which are providing auxiliary power, forgetting your crank battery for a second.
Yep.
Those two batteries in that bank, they must be of the same chemistry and of the same size because they're charged together.
Yeah.
So that's so this is an auxiliary battery we've got here. If you decide you want to add a second one, that needs to be the same chemistry because you're charging both of them together. But your crank battery is over here, right? So, but you're saying that doesn't have to be the same chemistry
because it's not connected at all.
But it's connected when the car's charging it.
Yeah, it's connected, but it's charged in a different way. It's charged from the alternator. You'll find your auxiliary batteries generally be charged from a DC-DC charger or in a simple case from a voltage sensitive relay.
Yeah.
So it's just where it comes into having the same size battery, same chemistry. It's only if you have more than one battery in your auxiliary battery bank.
Okay, cool.
Okay, that's cool to know.
So if I'm putting a battery underneath my bonnet to match with my crank battery, does that still have to be the same chemistry? Because if I'm linking said battery to my crank battery to make it a dual battery, does that have to be the same chemistry and same?
So some vehicles have space for a
dual battery
and another battery under the bonnet. Honestly, I'm not certain of the answer to that, but I believe that in that case, if it's connected up from the factory like that, you probably do need to have
same chemistry and same amp hour.
But in most vehicles, you'll find you've got a single crank battery under the engine, and then your auxiliary batteries will be found in the cargo area, in the canopy, or what have you. And
so I think Sam, you're probably referring to like if you've got this somewhere else in the system and you've got this, so your auxiliary, say lithium, set up charged from a different, like your DC to DC charger or something. So the charge profile through the DC to DC charger or whatever is relevant to the battery chemistry, whereas the battery under the bonnet is just voltage straight from the alternator, right? So there's no charge cycle to that, which is okay for sort of your flooded batteries, but not. But can you just charge a lithium battery straight from an alternator, or do you need something in between for that proper charge cycle?
It's not ideal, particularly for lithium batteries. It's not ideal. You can charge them very simply from a voltage sensitive relay, via a voltage sensitive relay, which is it's basically a simple isolator. So if the relay detects a certain voltage being put out by the alternator, then it will charge. It'll make the circuit. It will charge. When it detects that the voltage drops below a preset minimum, i.e. when the engine is off, it will cut that link, which means that the crank battery will not be discharged by the auxiliary battery charging when the car is off.
I have a question now because I personally don't have a new car. We're not really new car people, but lots of people with new cars are calling up because there's a difference with how the new cars on the market can charge an auxiliary battery and DC to DC chargers or what have you. Whereas none of the vehicles I've had, I believe, have needed one.
So it's a smart alternator, I think. The new cars
smart alternator. Yeah.
Correct. Now there's two types of smart alternators. The one that you're talking about there that's appearing in more and more new cars is called a variable voltage alternator. Mm-hmm. What that does is to save some power, and I believe it's to save some emissions. A variable voltage alternator will drop below 12.7 volts at times, even when the engine is on. When it detects that it doesn't need to be charging the battery.
Okay.
Now, a voltage sensitive relay will not work in those situations because there's fixed cut-in, cut-out points built in to a voltage-sensitive relay. So if a variable voltage smart alternator drops below 12.7 volts, the VSR will think that means that the car is off. It will cut the link. It will stop charging your auxiliary battery, even though the vehicle is on. Mm-hmm. So in those situations with those new vehicles, you must use a DC-DC charger. You cannot use a voltage-sensitive relay.
Okay.
And using a DC-DC charger has another benefit too, in that it actually provides a proper charge cycle to the battery, so you get better charge out of it. Am I correct there as well?
Absolutely correct. So a voltage sensitive relay will generally only charge the battery to say, let's call it 85% of full capacity. It varies depending on the battery chemistry, but use that as a rule of thumb. A DC-DC charger, as you said, you're exactly right. It has a much more advanced charge program and a charge program that is tailored to the different types of batteries available. So you can set the battery type and you'll find that charge program will charge the battery fully to 100% of total capacity.
So there's benefit to having a DC to DC charger regardless of whether or not your alternator requires it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So I feel like we've jumped. This episode's turning into this kind of soup of ideas and it's going wherever our brains are taking us. And I want to cover off on some basics before we go into – I want to ask about charge cycles. But before we go further, I want to cover off on some very basic terms so that those who are completely new to this understand. So when we talk about batteries, there's terms like CCA, amp hours, et cetera, So can we just clarify – I'll list off a few, just what it means. So CCA is cold cranking amps, right?
Yep.
And that refers, can you explain that?
That refers to, so say a battery has a CCA rating of 600 amps. That means that battery is able to deliver 600 amps for about 30 seconds in a 0 degree temperature to your starter battery. So say your starter battery's flat, you get a battery, an auxiliary battery with a CCA of 600. That's going to deliver 600 amps of power into your crank battery to start it up.
Okay, cool. So you find them in a starter battery. That's the important element you look for in a starter battery. So the truck's going to need more CCA.
Just to clarify, just to clarify that, it's you're right. It is found in starter batteries, and it's because to kick over an engine requires a lot of power. CCAs are not really relevant to deep cycle batteries because you don't use them to charge to start engines. I believe you can with an AGM battery. Certainly not with lithium. Lithium batteries, despite the advance in technology, cannot deliver the amps required to kick over an engine. So, and Zach's right. Yeah, it needs to do it for 30 seconds. That's the measurement. 30 seconds. It's actually 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Which is, I believe, don't quote me on this, but it might be around minus 32 degrees or minus 23. Yeah, it's certainly a very, very cold temperature, and it needs to do it without dropping below 7.2 volts at the end point.
Right. Okay. So
I'm just going to quickly, because you know how I roll.
It's going to be a long episode, isn't it?
My brain's gone somewhere, so I'm going to ask a question. You mentioned how deep cycle batteries don't really have that ability to produce that high immediate current. Your battery box has a jumpstart port in it, which I'm assuming people are using deep cycle lithiums and AGMs and things like that in your battery box. How do you have that jumpstart port there with those batteries in your?
Okay, so to jumpstart a car, you don't need quite the same number of amps. It's so the general rule of thumb, and this is an American measure, but you can easily convert it to an Australian one. For every 1 cubic inch of displacement in an engine, I believe you need 1 cold cranking amp or 1 amp of power for a petrol engine and about 2 for a diesel engine in order to jumpstart that vehicle. Now, so that's having said that, we wouldn't recommend you still wouldn't recommend you use a lithium battery inside that battery box to jumpstart a vehicle, but certainly via that higher rated Anderson port, you can deliver enough amps. Bearing in mind, it's only required to be delivered for a very short period of time. You can deliver sufficient amps from any other deep cycle battery types, AGM obviously being the most common, in order to jumpstart that vehicle.
Okay.
So am I right then in saying that you wouldn't want to do that regularly? It's really an emergency thing, because by using a deep cycle battery to start a car, you're discharging it really quickly and down possibly past that 50%, and that's then shortening the life of the battery.
Yeah. So an AGM battery, for example, 100 amp hour AGM, the quality ones on the market, you can generally deliver a current of about 1200 amps for 5 seconds. It's called a pulse current. Compare that to a same size lithium, for example, where your pulse current might only be sort of 400 amps for 5 seconds.
Okay.
So that leads me on to the next question, where you said like amp hour battery. So when we talk deep cycle batteries, we're usually talking amp hours, which is kind of a volume of stored energy that's there to run devices. I feel like I'm answering my own question here, but it's discharged at a slow rate. So that's the difference between your CCA battery or your crank or starter battery and your auxiliary battery, right?
Yeah, correct. So amp hours is amp hours differs in theory compared to practice. So an amp hour refers to how many amps a battery can deliver over the period of 1 hour. Now, in some cases, particularly with older technology or lesser quality lithium batteries, you can't deliver a continuous, what they call 1C, or you can't deliver that entire capacity from that battery over 1 hour. Some lithium batteries, for example, might be only sort of 50 amps per hour. So it's certainly not to say that if a battery is say 100 amp hours, you can deliver 100 amps over 1 hour. It's just a theoretical measure to say that you could deliver 50 amps over 2 hours, for example, or 25 amps over 4 hours, or 10 amps over 10 hours.
Okay. It
just
also
put that
works
caveat in there just in case people think that because you've got a 100 amp hour battery, I can deliver 100 amps per hour. Not necessarily.
It also means you can't get 100 amps or 100 hours of 1 amp either, can you? It's not an exact science.
No, it's not. You're right, because the capacity of a battery is always nominal. We call it a 100 amp hour battery, but the actual current that can be delivered from that battery will differ depending on how quickly you discharge it. So there's a 1C rating, which is the entire capacity of the battery over 1 hour. There's a 5C rating, which is where you draw 1/5 of the total capacity of the battery over 5 hours, or each hour, I should say, over 5 hours. C20 rating. So so you're right. It's not an exact. Well, I suppose it's an exact science, but the 100 amp hour is not an exact measure, I suppose, is probably a good way to put it.
Okay.
You mentioned, sorry, I'm going to interrupt you here. You mentioned nominal there before. What does that term nominal refer to, like nominal voltages, state of charges, things like that? Can you give us a bit more info on those terminologies?
Yeah, absolutely. So it'd be very difficult to name a product if you had to, a battery, I should say, if you had to, in the title of the product, stipulate every number of amps it could deliver over various time periods, the voltage that it would be over, various stages of the charge cycle. A lithium battery, for example, its nominal voltage is generally around 12.8 volts, which is it's roughly the midpoint of the discharge cycle. So a lithium battery, it starts at, call it 14.2 volts or thereabouts. It'll drop quickly to say 13.2. It'll hover in the range of 13.2 to 12.4 for the vast majority of its charge cycle, and then it'll drop to 10 volts at the end of the cycle. AGM is more linear. It'll start off about 13.8. It'll drop to about 10.5 when it's fully discharged. But you have to pick a figure, so the nominal voltage refers to just sort of, it's an approximation, the midpoint figure. Nominal capacity, very similar as we just discussed. The capacity of the battery will change depending on how quickly you discharge it. But it'd be very wordy and unwieldy if you had to say, well, this battery is 100 amp hour at C20 and 96 amp hours at C5 and 92 amp hours at C1 C3. You see what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
So we nominate 100 amp hours as the capacity as an example, because that's the commonly accepted standard, which is the C20 rating. So when you see this probably leads into something else, but it's related to what we were just talking about. When you see a battery where the capacity is 100 amp hours, for example, if it's a reputable manufacturer, that capacity, that nominal capacity, should match what they call the C20 rating. So if the battery is continuously discharged over a 20-hour period, that's the total capacity that the battery will deliver. We're aware of some, I'm not going to mention any names, but we're aware of some manufacturers towards the cheaper end of the market that actually don't use the C20 rating. They use an entirely different figure, which, look, it's probably arguable to a degree that it's relevant, but it's certainly it's usually about 20% higher than the C20 rating. They use it to sell more batteries and put less lithium in the batteries, basically. So always be aware that nominal capacities aren't always quoted using the same measure, but all reputable manufacturers will quote the C20 rating.
That's good to know.
Is that would that be stated generally on the battery somewhere? Is there like a little standard symbol or something that people can look out for that? It's generally buried in the fine print, particularly amongst those manufacturers that don't use C20 rating. Yep. If
it's not, if you're comfortable that the manufacturer is reputable and it's not listed, you can make a fairly safe assumption that it is the C20 rating. But certainly the what do they say? You get what you pay for. If you see a lithium battery that is
too good to be true,
that has a capacity of that's right, has a capacity of 100 amp hours, but they want to charge you $499 for it with free shipping, it's probably fairly safe to bet that they're not referring to the C20 rating. They're referring to the higher rating, which has no basis in practical use.
I think the same. I think the same things aren't good and good things aren't cheap.
I I think that's good to know for people because there's a massive range of lithium batteries, right? And their prices are huge. So a big question in people's mind is how much do I get for, this, significant amount extra that I'm going to pay for a reputable battery?
I think especially
these are the questions to ask.
With Google now, you can just punch in what you're looking for and you get that little Google shopping window that comes up and it's literally just a picture and a name and a price. And a lot of the time people are just relying on the fact that what they're seeing there is enough for them to make that choice to go buy. And if there's one battery that's like $800 and another one that's like saying like $499, that they seem to be the only bits of information that people consider.
Yeah.
So
there's no requirements to put certain things. Like some things are done to a standard, like your lighting range. There is a standard that things are tested to. There's nothing like that for these batteries.
Not specifically relating to what we're talking to. No, there's no legal requirement to list the C20 rating as your nominal capacity. Unfortunately, there should be.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
But they are bringing out a lot more laws now with lithium batteries to get them into said countries, different countries around the world. They do need to pass a specific readout to be brought in now.
Okay,
that's good to know.
So moving on to
that's around safety. Sorry.
Right.
And that's around the
we've got the
safety piece.
We've got a question here on we might as well, given we're on it. So what is the danger with buying cheap lithium batteries? And that's a question we had down here. Obviously there is, you're laughing a bit, so there's obviously a real consideration here.
Lithium batteries poorly constructed are dangerous things.
Very dangerous.
I mean, make no bones about that whatsoever.
Okay.
Lithium can explode.
Right.
Absolutely it can. It is a volatile substance. And you must make sure that your batteries are being manufactured to a high standard in order to ensure that they don't do things like explode.
Wow.
So that's why the standards that Zac is referring to have been brought in, and it's checked at the point of export, I believe, by customs in the exporting country, and I think also in the importing country. I may be wrong there, but yeah, certainly. Because of these events, and they've happened around the world. It's by no means confined to Australia, of course. There is more regulatory oversight of these products to ensure that that we're only bringing in safe batteries, and that's a very new thing. When I say very new, I'm talking about only the last month or two. It's been brought in, so it's come to the attention of the regulators around the world, and we hope that some of the more backyard or cavalier manufacturers that don't care about anything other than providing a battery at a low price, we hope that some of them are weeded out of the market.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess what you're talking about is really important and hopefully a developing space with legislations and standards, because I know just personally for me, even in the last few years that I've worked here at Snowy's, the interest in 12 volt and, having 12 volt as really a central and integral part to anybody who sort of camps more than a couple of days at a time is really, really developing solar power, all that sort of stuff. So it is something that, that should be regulated more.
So I want to touch a little bit on discharge and charge cycle. So firstly, discharge. So a flooded lead acid battery, 100 amp hour flooded lead acid battery, you've got 50% available capacity in there. So you've only really got 50 amp hours. And like we said before, this isn't an exact science. And then lithium, you supposedly got the whole lot, but I know you've spoken to me before and said it's actually not 100%. Can you just provide some clarification around if people are buying, 100 amp hour isn't necessarily 100 amp hour, depends on what you're buying?
Sure. So you'll find with most, other than lithium, with most or all other types of deep cycle batteries, the service life of the battery measured in the number of charge cycles will drop quite quickly if you habitually discharge them to less than 50% of total capacity. Now, lithium. Before I go to lithium, you can depending on the chemistry of the battery, 70 to 80% in a pinch is fine, but certainly you wouldn't do it. You wouldn't do it all the time unless you like spending money on new batteries. Lithium, the metrics are slightly different. They're significantly different. 80% discharge is a generally considered safe safe level for lithium batteries in order to maximise their service life. But you can in a pinch discharge them to 99%. And again, as long as you don't do it regularly, you won't negatively affect the service life of the battery.
So is it 50% from all other batteries, 80% for lithium? Is that a pretty good guide?
Batteries.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, correct. That's the generally accepted standard.
And so that's talking about discharge, but charging the battery. Now there's different charge cycles for each battery. Now I know like we've got, this is a solar controller here, right? And I know I've got this on my solar panel, and this does all different battery types from wet, AGM, calcium, and lithium as well. What's the importance of using the right charge cycle for the battery you've got?
Yeah, so different types of batteries will need different charge cycles just because of their chemistry. So, for example, wet or flooded cell and calcium batteries, every period of, say, every 28 days or thereabouts, or after heavy discharge, there needs to be an additional program built into the charger called an equalization program, which is where the charger will ensure that all the cells inside the battery are brought up to an equal voltage.
Right.
If you don't do that, again, service life of the battery, or the battery won't charge properly, it won't charge to full capacity, and the service life will be significantly decreased. Fully charged voltages are different between battery types as well. We mentioned before that fully charged lithium battery will generally sit sort of 14.2 to 14.4 volts. A fully charged AGM battery will sit at 13.8 volts, give or take. So the charger needs to read the voltage and to be aware of what type of battery it's charging, so it knows when it's full. Another example, lithium batteries don't require a float program. So some other types of deep cycle batteries require a float voltage, a constant voltage to be delivered to the battery after it's fully charged to maintain it. Lithium batteries do not. In fact, I believe that a float cycle will damage a lithium battery if it's applied.
So it's really just the cycle. When we talk about the cycle, it's delivering voltages at different levels for different periods of time based on the chemistry of the battery to make sure it reaches full charge. And you don't get that like correct. We talked before from an alternator. That's just putting charge straight into a battery. But if you're using like something from solar, or your DC to DC charger, or a 240 volt charger, like a CTEC branded charger or something like that, that then has a pre-programmed cycle to get the most life out of your battery. And how often should you actually use one of those to sort of fully charge it? You're saying at least once a month? Is that what you said with the 28 days?
Oh, no, that was a different situation. That was the equalization charge for calcium and flooded cells.
Right.
You should use a battery charger, or a DC-DC charger, or a solar regulator with those more advanced charge programs as much as you can.
Okay.
So not all the time, but certainly if you want to maximise your battery service life, and that's what it comes back to, just making sure you're not spending money on new batteries more than you have to.
Okay.
So the more you can put them on those more advanced charges, the better the longer the service life of the battery will be.
So if you can,
lithium.
Sorry, Zach, you go.
Sorry, Ben. Lithium batteries do hold charge for a bit longer than your standard AGM batteries as well. So if you fully charge a lithium battery to 14.4 volts, like Sam said, it will hold that 14.4 volts for roughly 2 to 3 months, where an AGM will start decreasing in voltage after about 1.
Okay. Is there a benefit to just if you've got a caravan with batteries on it? I know you guys sell like a little trickle charger to keep it topped up, but if you've got the ability just to plug it into 240 volt and leave it charged, leave it plugged on, just leave it so that it sits on that float voltage, is that beneficial to the battery?
No, but if you're using a charger that has a lithium program, it will know to switch off the charger when it's fully charged. What about as opposed to an AGM, for example, where it will deliver a float voltage, a float charge.
Okay, but for an AGM then, because I've got AGM, you just lengthen the life by just leaving it, sort of keeping that voltage at the higher level for longer.
Yeah, probably. Certainly you shouldn't let an AGM be stored without charge for too long. Mm-hmm. That's for sure. Whether or not a continuous charge will improve the battery's life, I'm not sure.
Okay.
But I do know that you shouldn't leave it for months on end without applying a top-up charge to it. That will tend to start deteriorating the cells over time.
Awesome.
I have a question in terms of, we've talked a lot about AGMs, lithiums, depths of life cycles, depths of discharge, all that sort of stuff. Why is there a depth of discharge? Why can't you or shouldn't you consistently discharge AGM more than 50% or lithium 80%? Like what physically is going on there that's causing damage?
I have absolutely no idea, and I would be lying too if I told you I did. I don't know. I mean, look, I know in broad terms, right? But certainly, I'm not that much of an authority on battery chemistry that I can tell you the exact chemical reactions that are going on to reduce the surface life. It deteriorates the active material in the plates inside the battery, but. Unfortunately, you're asking the wrong place. If you want any more technical information than that.
I geeked at it one day and watched. There's a heap of stuff online about that, and they've got videos, and it's all about electrons and all that sort of thing. So it does get very scientific.
Yeah, right. Okay.
But there's also like a reconditioned cycle. I know on my charger there's a reconditioned cycle that's designed to kind of deliver a higher charge to try and recover some of this. But it's scientific. I think it's beyond the scope of what we're going into today. But if you're interested, Google it. Because there's some cool pictures out there that show like pictures of or diagrams of like electrons flowing and all that sort of thing. So it's pretty cool.
Now, my next question is to do with actual charge voltage. Can a lower charge voltage affect the maximum charge capacity for the battery? Or is it like obviously lower voltage, it will obviously prolong the amount of time it takes to charge your battery, but is there a point where a battery won't get to 100% if it's not having certain input requirements met?
Undoubtedly that's correct.
If it's not delivering said voltage that battery needs, then it's not going to fully charge. If you're delivering 13.6 volts to a lithium, which requires 14.4 volts, I don't think it would ever reach 100%.
But it will charge, but not 100%.
Not 100%.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Basically, wherever the amp reading on 13.7 volts is, it'll stop there.
So that leads on
that's
to...
one of the common features. Sorry, Ben. That's one of the common features between different battery types is that the charge voltage they require is not materially different. There's small variations, but the charge voltage they require is not materially different. But as we've been saying, if you deliver a substantially lower voltage than that, it won't get to 100%.
So that leads on to different types of charges then, because we've got this one in front of us here is a PWM. Looking down at my notes here, which I think's wrong, got PVM, but it's PWM, which is pulse wave modulation. Then you've got the DC to DC chargers, which we talked about. Yeah, that's what I meant to say. DC to DC charger, and also MPPT, which is maximum power point tracking. So, can you, I know that we could get pretty detailed here as well, but the PVM's a basic entry level one, but then DC to DC charger and MPPT are two products, but can also be in the same product?
Yeah, so what we're talking about now is specifically relating to solar panels. So MPPT and PWM are two different types of solar regulator. So it's not specifically relating to charging a battery, but it is related to charging a battery with a solar panel.
Right.
Briefly, a maximum power point tracking or MPPT regulator has the ability to more quickly charge a battery if the right circumstances exist. In particular, the maximum voltage of the solar panel must be, what's it called, the open circuit voltage.
Open circuit voltage. Closed circuit.
It's one of the two. It's either open circuit or closed circuit. But sorry, we didn't prepare for this answer. But if the maximum voltage of the solar panel is high enough, then the MPPT controller or regulator can take advantage of that to deliver a higher current into the battery, which results in faster charging. PWM, on the other hand, it tails off a charge by just moderating the width of the pulses, the width of the electrical pulse. If you think about it as a sine wave, the width of that wave will increase or decrease in order to moderate the charge. The downside of an MPPT regulator is that they're significantly heavier, so less portable, and they're much more advanced in terms of their electronic circuitry as well. So they tend to be less reliable than a PWM controller over time. So you mentioned that ours is a PWM regulator, and you're right. We get a lot of questions about why we chose PWM as opposed to MPPT, when, at least in theory, an MPPT controller can charge a battery more quickly. And portability and reliability are two of the things that two of the key determinants in our decision to offer a PWM rather than MPPT. Because, I mean, look, a lot of times if you're taking the solar panel to charge your batteries out bush, you're not within cooey of a shop that could probably diagnose and fix a broken controller.
Right.
And certainly you don't want to be carrying more weight with you than you have to either. Portability is key. So hence why we chose the PWM.
I've always also possibly been of the misguided opinion, but I'll stick to it anyway, and interested to hear what you think. Is that for most people who possibly have a solar system on their house, they'll have an MPPT controller. But the reality is the size of your camping or off-grid systems, your portable off-grid systems, the variation between a PWM and an MPPT controller in a system of that size is really negligible. Whereas when you have a larger, kilowatt capacity system on your house, that's when the value of an MPPT charger will come in.
Absolutely correct. Yeah. And the maximum voltage of the solar panels you find on your roof will be much, much higher than the maximum voltage of a solar panel as well, portable solar panel.
Yeah, because we do often have people go, I don't want a PWM. I've heard that MPPT is better, and it's like often, I'll say it actually makes no difference if you're just camping. It's really not that big a deal.
Yes, absolutely.
So just having confirmation on that's good.
Well, I get really good charge from this controller. Your 200 watt panels through this controller charges both my batteries really well. So, the voltage is right up there. I had another question and it slipped my mind. You go while I remember what it is.
So just on solar panels now, is there a particular reason? I mean, I think obviously Ben and I do know, but for the listeners, really commonly we get asked, I want to run my fridge, and can you just tell me what solar panel I need to plug into it? And I know you're having a bit of a laugh. We have a bit of a laugh as well. Or people who, they don't understand why you require a solar charge controller or even anything between a solar panel and an appliance. So can you just talk a bit more about why you need charge regulators?
I feel like I've been dominating this conversation so far, so I'm just going to hand over.
As we touched on before with solar panels, they give out an open and a closed voltage. So an open voltage could be 22 volts. Their closed voltage is about 19.2 volts. If you're putting, say, 19 volts into a 12-volt battery, it's not going to work, right? That's why the regulator's there. What the regulator does, it converts the 22 or 19 volts from the solar panel back to a 12-volt system so it can feed said 12-volt battery.
Okay. So I have another question for you, which is more from my own head. Often portable power packs that are like an all-in-one unit, they're becoming more prevalent on the market. They will have an inbuilt MPPT, for example, so they require a raw panel connected. They still have solar input specs, and my assumption is, or my understanding is, if your portable power pack has a solar input spec with your voltage and amps, your solar panel also your solar panel output has to fit into that solar panel input spec into your portable power pack. If there is an inbuilt charge controller or MPPT controller or something like that within the battery pack, surely you could plug, in theory, any capacity raw panel into that, and that charge controller will regulate what the battery requires, or is it not as simple as that? Does that make sense what I'm saying?
You can disconnect our regulator and put the panel directly into the power pack that you're describing there, and it'll be very, very rare occurrence that any sort of a portable 12 or any sort of a 12-volt solar panel will not be suitable to go into that inbuilt regulator. If you try and put a 24-volt solar panel on there, again, nominal 24-volt solar panel on there, that won't work. But certainly any 12-volt solar panel shouldn't say any because I'm sure there's an edge case where it doesn't. But
well, I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to give you an example, okay? So
Sure.
we stock, obviously not a Hard Korr, but we stock a 40 amp hour AGM portable power pack with a built-in MPPT.
Yep.
So its solar input specs are 18 to 20 volts, which is pretty standard.
Yep.
5 amps.
Yep.
Really common question.
5 amps.
5 amps.
5 amps.
5 amps.
Okay.
So a really
That's a good
common,
point. I
really
like
common
that, yeah.
question that we get is, I really like the look of these 200 watt crop skin solar panels. If I just bypass my regulator, can I plug this solar panel in? But obviously your 200 watt panels, they fit that 18 to 20 volts, but they're 11.1 amps or something. So
See, I have had that once, and I'm not sure whether the panel actually regulates. So instead of delivering that 8 to 11 amps is what we state it does, I'm not sure if it regulates down to the 5 amps that's required, or it just simply doesn't work.
Okay.
Yeah, no. If the capacity, if the rating of the inbuilt regulator is not sufficient to handle the current coming from the panel, you can't use it. I'm really actually glad that you said that because that's something that we didn't address in the answer before. That's the one thing you need to be aware of. If your regulator can handle a maximum of 5 amps, you must ensure that that's like it's probably an 80 watt solar panel at a reasonable efficiency.
I think I worked out it was like 90 watts, I think was sort of your max.
Yeah, that would be right. Yeah.
And so,
whereas obviously that regulator you got in front of you there, that's a 15 amp regulator.
Yeah.
That's pretty common. But yeah, as you said, always make sure that the regulator can handle the amount of current coming from your solar panel.
So the risk there, sorry Ben, I'm going to interrupt you again, just so people are aware, the risk there with not having compatible solar panels is that you'll fry your regulator basically. You'll just cook it.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So it won't just cut out, you'll fry it. So that doesn't leave that low voltage or that low amp rating doesn't leave it open for very many solar panels.
No, not in the particular instance that I'm talking about, unless it's a small panel of say 90 watts.
Okay.
I mean, you possibly might, and also correct me if I'm wrong, you possibly might get away with a 100 watt panel, given that solar panels don't generally put out regularly the maximum amperage. And, I know with amperage there can be a small leeway, but you're right. That particular product I'm talking about requires small panels.
I think I know what you're talking about, but my understanding was it just if there's 11 amps available, it only lets 5 amps through. But
no.
Okay, all right. Maybe we're going off on a different topic here, but maybe clarify with the manufacturer.
Yeah,
we might look into that. So that's sent us off on a whirl in our minds.
Every solar panel should. Sorry, guys, just to round off that point. You were talking about sort of having to estimate the wattage and talking about efficiency, things like that. Every solar panel should state in practice how many amps it's rated to produce. Mm-hmm. So it's probably not quite right to look at the wattage. More so look at the number of amps that the panel is rated to produce.
Fair to say, though, that in those conditions of solar panel testing, it's quite difficult to replicate that in a standard camping environment in Australia. So it's unlikely that you'll be getting that max amp output consistently.
No, well, consistently is that's correct. So obviously in inclement weather, if it's cloudy, you're not going to get it. If it's winter, you're not quite going to get it. You'll get close. Mm-hmm. The rating is obviously in ideal conditions. But look, if you're going to buy a solar panel to connect up to a specific power pack, you want to make sure that even in ideal conditions, it's not going to push through too many amps.
Okay.
Now, most regulators, not that you want to ever rely on this, most regulators, I believe, have about a 25% fat built in. So a 15 amp rated regulator might be, what's that, 3.75 above that. So 18, it might actually be able to handle 18.75 amps, but you would never want to actually you never want to try that, put it that way. Okay. Yeah, that's right. Pushing limits is just, when it comes to even 12 volt power, when it comes to power, you just don't want to be operating on that, that edge.
That's
make sure you're plenty fat.
I think we're going to be looking into a few other products now just to make sure we understand some of the limitations of a few other products now. But I know with my 200 watt solar panel, which is the one you guys sell, I get on a reasonable day fairly consistently sort of 7 or 8 amps up until the sun drops down in the afternoon. So that would then push it over the limits for that pack.
I have a couple of questions. Earlier on in the conversation when we were talking about the difference between your starter batteries and your deep cycle batteries, you mentioned that deep cycle batteries are not designed to receive continuous charge. Did I interpret that correctly?
Lithium batteries.
Okay.
Almost, yeah. Lithium batteries aren't designed to receive a float charge.
Okay, that's what you're talking. Yeah, no
so
worries.
other types of deep cycle batteries are, but lithium specifically, you should not apply a float voltage to it.
Okay, but in general use, if people, sorry Zach, if people are, you've got their load on their battery throughout the day, they've got solar coming in, there's load going out, solar's coming in, it's really not that big a deal to have a constant input there with the solar on a lithium.
If you've got a load going out, it's fine because the charger should be able to recognise that and to apply the correct charge program.
I know our charger recognises when the lithium battery is full. It'll flash full on the screen until it drops down to a certain percentage, and then it'll start putting those amps back in. But that regulator does regulate it, and it does state when it is full. It won't continuously pump power into it. A bit like the Victron chargers. The Victron chargers do have a float mode, but then they do tend to go into storage once the battery is full. It never keeps pumping residual power into the battery.
Yep.
Okay, so it refers to float voltage, that continual charge that you're talking about.
Yeah. Just to round off that point as well, people often say, you can use an AGM program to charge a lithium battery. It's not great for it, but you can. But the one thing you must ensure that you do if you're using an AGM program to charge a lithium battery is you disconnect the charger when it's full.
Yeah.
Good tip.
Because the AGM, you apply float voltage when it's full. Lithium, you must not.
Yeah, you're happy to stand around and keep an eye on it, then sure.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
That's been I think this is our longest
I've
episode.
got more questions.
You still got more questions?
Yeah, sorry.
All right.
So in terms of...
I can keep talking.
No, so like your AGM batteries and things like that, they're obviously... the most popular because I guess they're the most accessible in terms of affordability and things like that. They've been around for a long time. I know that, a few years ago, a lot of the 12-volt accessories that you could buy possibly weren't necessarily lithium compatible, and now a lot of stuff is being developed to be lithium compatible. Two questions on this one. The first one is if you moving forward with how the space of 12-volt is developing, do you think people who run AGM systems are going to need to rely on voltage regulators a bit more if they're using appliances that require that higher continuous voltage?
Sorry, can you say that again for me? I didn't quite understand.
So what I'm saying is, and I don't know if even the question is relevant, but with how AGM batteries, they obviously drop their voltage consistently over time. Lithium batteries hold their voltage for longer. So do you think there's I guess it's a two-part question. Do you see AGM batteries and things like that being eventually phased out in favour of lithium? And also with AGM systems now, do you think there's more of a need with lithium compatible appliances and things for those systems to have voltage regulators in them to ensure they're getting consistent power out of their AGM systems?
Okay, the answer to your first question is I can foresee, I can certainly foresee a time in the not too distant future when AGM is phased out. The advantages of lithium batteries compared to AGM are numerous. Not only the increase or the improved availability of capacity. We talk about the 50% versus 80%. They charge quicker, they last longer. I'm not even scratching the surface on the advantages. Obviously, as you sort of touched on, the main issue with lithium. Well, look, the issue right now with lithium is still price point. In the past, it was also safety, and that's not just with dodgy outfits. That's even the more premium lithium batteries in the past. I'm talking, several years ago. There used to be some safety concerns around them. Their tolerance of heat, for example, was pretty rubbish. But now with the new technology, particularly the lithium iron phosphate, which is widely considered to be the best type of lithium chemistry, and the continuous decrease in price that we've seen and will continue to see, I think the writing is on the wall for AGM batteries. I mean, it's basically a question of scale to a degree. Whether lithium will ever reach the same price as AGM, it probably won't. Obviously, lithium, it contains a precious metal, well, not a precious metal, but a metal that has a significant cost to it, which is lithium, as opposed to AGMs, which are, it's porous electrolytes dissolved in electrolytes in a porous fiberglass mat. So they're always going to be cheaper to manufacture. But I certainly see a time in the not too distant future when the price of lithium will be competitive enough that it starts to overtake AGM in terms of the number of units demanded worldwide. And once the worldwide demand for AGM batteries starts to decline, it's only a matter of time before the price of those starts to increase because manufacturers aren't getting the same economies of scale they used to. I don't mean to get into an economics discussion here, but it's a long way to answer a short question, which is yes, I think AGM batteries will continue to reduce in terms of the share of market to a point where maybe it's not feasible to offer them anymore. The second question, which I've only got a fuzzy recollection of in my mind because I've been talking for too long.
It was just to do with voltage regulators because there's been a few inquiries I've probably dealt with lately where people are running AGM systems and they're getting cut out of their load at only say 30% discharge, for example, because
I've had real world situations on that with some type of fridges. Some type of fridges require a certain amount of voltage to operate. Yeah. And when an AGM starts to taper like it does, it will drop past said voltage that fridge requires, and they may still have 30, 40% left in their battery.
Yeah. So
that's why lithium...
Yeah, so I was going to say, in terms of those voltage regulators, at present, most people will they're like an optional accessory. Do you think they're going to be things that are going to start to be part and parcel with AGM systems generally?
Well, I've never thought about that, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's probably a limitation of chemistry itself. Yeah. I'm not terribly familiar with voltage regulators on the discharge side, but certainly what Zac was talking about, where certain accessories require a certain voltage, otherwise they'll cut out. That's probably an inbuilt limitation in AGM's chemistry because it does have a linear discharge cycle. There's no getting around the fact that, I mean, it's not exactly linear, but there's no getting around the fact that at a fully charged, the AGM is about 13.8 volts. At full discharge is 10.5 volts, and it goes. It's a curve, but it's a shallow curve. So at some point in the it will cut out cycle, it will cut out for some accessories. Yeah.
Just something we were talking about limitations of lithium before. You mentioned heat. The lithium batteries aren't at the stage of being able to install it under a bonnet yet, are they? Because they don't handle the heat.
Oh, absolutely not. Do not believe anyone that tells you that lithium can be installed under a bonnet. They are lying to you. It cannot.
So if you've got a space under there, it's got to be lead acid. There's some AGMs that are okay, but not lithium.
Yes.
Okay.
Heat tolerance for lithium batteries has improved significantly, but you should not ever place it under a bonnet. The under bonnet gets really bloody hot. I mean, you see the stories of dogs and children dying in the back seat of cars. That's, you think about what happens when you're in a space where you're fully encased by metal.
Yeah.
I mean, it's that's a great question. I'm really pleased you asked it because no is the answer.
And that's a safety thing or a performance thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a safety thing.
Oh, it's a safety thing. Well, it's both. It's definitely both. The lithium batteries, well, all deep cycle batteries, but lithium in particular has an optimal temperature range. There's three. There's an optimal storage temperature range, there's optimal discharge temperature range, and optimal charge temperature range. And in some situations there's more of a range than others, but under no circumstances can lithium handle extreme heat. performance will deteriorate first.
Yep.
That's for sure.
So there you go. Don't put your lithium battery under your bonnet.
Alrighty. Well, on that very important safety note,
longest episode ever.
Longest episode ever. We're going to tie this up now. I think we've been chatting away.
Is there a trophy for that or a medal? Or
we'll work something out. I can't make any promises.
Sure.
Free six-pack will do.
Yeah.
Could probably afford that.
Drink 4X up there, do you? Or do you want a Bundy and rum mixer? What do you want?
Come on now. We're not from Townsville.
Sorry, we've
That's
offended
probably
you
Great
now.
Northern nowadays.
No, Great Northern, yeah.
No worries.
Townsville, by the way, please don't read into that.
I'm going to say I have a lemon squash, and there's another Queensland YouTube channel that I love watching. They call it a lemon squash for the 4X. I'm like, I might pass on the lemon squash. I think. Yeah. All righty.
We call them Milton mangoes up here.
All right, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much for joining us. It's been a really awesome chat. Given what we've discussed, I'm sure there's going to be multiple questions, and there's probably another episode in there somewhere down the track where we can pick your brains a bit more. So really appreciate you. Zach's like, please, no.
Battery chemistry, not my forte.
Not your forte.
That's all right.
Yeah, we
No, it was good, it was
really
good.
appreciate the time that you've given us today, guys. So thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah.
With these two podcasts together, you've probably experienced what a guest on Joe Rogan's podcast experiences.
Well, I think they have it
Yeah.
much easier. They talk about life and,
you're right.
what's going on. They don't talk about products.
Do you guys want to talk about life at all?
No, I think
next
we
time.
better shut this down before we get to.
Awesome.
All right.
No worries.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Hardcore.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks.
See ya.
Alrighty, there. You've got that, folks. Hopefully you're feeling a little bit more confident or massively confused when it comes to batteries and portable power. We will see you again next week for another episode of the Snowies Camping Show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys. See you next time.